The sage stood in the eye of the storm. Around him, the market of 1,000 voices exploded with urgency. Salespeople shouting promotions that expired in minutes. Cell phone notifications going off like war alarms. Fragmented conversations about impossible deadlines and deferred dreams. It was as if all of humanity had forgotten how to breathe in silence. He closed his eyes for a moment, and something extraordinary happened. The chaos didn't disappear, but transformed into a distant symphony, like waves crashing against ancient rocks. Right now, as you hear these words, how many notifications are waiting for your attention? How many mental voices are vying for control of your inner peace? What you're about to discover is no longer a relaxation technique or a productivity method disguised as spirituality. These are 7 hidden principles that Lao Tzu used to navigate chaos without getting lost in it. Principles that have been deliberately hidden because they reveal a disturbing truth. You don't need to silence the world to find your inner mountain. The burning question is this: what if the problem was never the noise outside, but the resistance you've created within yourself? What if there's a way to inhabit the chaos without being devoured by it? Get ready, because what you'll discover in the next 60 minutes will challenge everything you thought you knew about peace, control, and the art of living without being crushed by the speed of the modern world. Welcome to Axiom Sage, where ancient wisdom meets modern wounds to create something no superficial self-help can offer. Real, gradual, and lasting transformation. I am the one who walks between the teachings of ancient masters and the pains of those living today, translating for you what Lao Tzu really meant when he spoke of the path that cannot be named. Have you ever woken up feeling like you're fighting a war you never declared? As if each day is a race against an invisible clock that never stops, a competition against people you don't even know, for prizes you're not even sure you want? If so, you're not alone. You're experiencing what I call marketplace of 1,000 voices syndrome. That state in which your mind has become a marketplace where every thought, every worry, every anxiety is screaming to be heard first. The sage in our story isn't just a character. He's the part of you that still remembers what it was like to live before you became hostage to your own mind. Before every decision became an existential crisis. Before every silence felt like loneliness. Before every pause felt like a waste of time. He represents the you that still exists, hidden beneath layers of social conditioning, fear of judgment, and the constant pressure to be productive. The truth few speak is this: chaos is not your enemy. Your resistance to chaos is what's slowly killing you. And the 7 principles I'm about to reveal won't teach you how to run from the storm. They'll teach you how to dance with it in ways you never imagined possible. Because there's a world of difference between being in chaos and being chaos. And when you understand that difference, everything changes. It was on a morning like any other that the sage witnessed the moment that would change his understanding of modern human suffering. He was walking through the market when he saw a woman standing in the middle of the crowd, completely still, tears streaming down her face. These were not tears of ordinary sadness. They were tears of someone who had reached the limit of their own endurance. She held her cell phone in one hand and a coffee in the other, but her hands trembled as if carrying the weight of 1,000 responsibilities. Around her, the world continued its frenetic dance. Merchants shouted offers that would expire in minutes. Cars honked impatiently. People hurried past with tense faces, all seemingly fleeing from something invisible. And there she was, an island of exhaustion in an ocean of haste. The sage approached slowly and asked, "What are you carrying that weighs more than the world?" She looked at him with the eyes of someone who recognizes someone who understands, and replied, "I don't know how to stop anymore. I don't remember what it was like to breathe without thinking about 20 things at once." In that moment, the sage understood that she was not just one person in the marketplace. She was a mirror of millions of modern souls trapped in the syndrome he came to call emptiness resistance. They had created such a fear of silence, such a dread of pause, such a terror of emptiness, that they had turned their minds into permanently open markets, where every thought was a salesman screaming for attention. And it was looking at her that he remembered Lao Tzu's words: "If the world is a whirlwind, the way is to learn to be a mountain." But how do you become a mountain when you've been conditioned to be a whirlwind? How do you find the eye of the storm when you've become the storm itself? The answer wasn't in more techniques, more methods, more steps to follow. The answer lay in 7 hidden principles that challenge everything you've learned about how to deal with the chaos of modern life. Principle 1. The silence that cannot be heard. The first mistake you need to abandon is the idea that silence is the absence of sound. How many times have you tried to meditate and felt frustrated because your mind wouldn't stop talking? How many times have you sought a quiet place and still felt agitated inside? The problem isn't the external noise. It's that you've confused silence with emptiness, and emptiness with death. The sage watched people rush from one appointment to another, from one notification to another, from one thought to another, as if stopping meant disappearing. He saw the anxiety etched on the faces of those afraid to be alone with their own thoughts for more than 30 seconds. It was as if an entire generation had developed an allergy to silence, treating it as a void urgently needing to be filled. But Lao Tzu whispered a disturbing truth through the centuries. The vase is useful because of the empty space. It's not the wall that defines the vase, it's the space between the walls. It's not the sounds that define music, it's the silence between the notes. It's not thoughts that define your mind, it's the consciousness that observes the thoughts, and that consciousness is naturally silent. Modern neuroscience confirms what Taoists knew millennia ago. When your nervous system is in constant hyperactivity, when you live in a state of permanent alert, your body produces cortisol and adrenaline, as if you were being chased by a predator. But the predator, in modern life, is the very resistance to emptiness. You become addicted to stimuli because you've learned to fear what happens when they stop. True silence is not the absence of sound. It is pure presence. It is that state where you are not trying to escape the moment, not planning the next, not ruminating on the last. It is when you simply are. And in that being, something miraculous happens. You realize you were always complete. The emptiness you so feared was not absence. It was infinite potential waiting to be recognized. Here's your first transformative practice. For 1 minute, just 1 minute a day, observe your own breathing without trying to change it. Don't try to breathe deeper, slower, or more consciously. Just observe. And when your mind starts to speak, thank it for visiting and gently return to observation. You're not trying to silence the mind. You're learning to notice the silence that already exists between thoughts. Principle 2. Let go of invisible control. There's a form of control so subtle you don't even realize you're being controlled by it. Invisible control. It's that mental voice that whispers that you need to have everything planned, everything organized, everything predictable to feel safe. It's the illusion that if you try hard enough, you can avoid all of life's pain, frustration, and uncertainty. The sage encountered an executive who had planned every detail of his career for 20 years. He had annual, monthly, weekly, and daily goals. He controlled his diet, his schedule, his relationships, and his investments. On paper, he was the perfect example of a fulfilled man. In reality, he was having panic attacks because his 16-year-old daughter had decided she wanted to be an artist instead of a doctor, as he had planned for her. How can I control my daughter's future if I can't even control my own thoughts? He asked the sage, tears of frustration welling up in his eyes. It was the perfect question to understand the paradox of control. The tighter you tighten the noose, the more it slips from your grasp. The more you try to control life, the more uncontrollable it becomes. Lao Tzu taught something that challenges the entire Western mentality of productivity and achievement. The wise man does not act, and therefore nothing is left undone. He does not control, and therefore nothing gets out of control. This is not passivity. It is Wu Wei, the art of frictionless action. It is learning to distinguish between what can be influenced and what must be accepted. Think about how many hours of your day you spend trying to control things that are completely beyond your control. What other people think of you, how the future will unfold, whether your past decisions were right or wrong, whether you'll be able to avoid all the pain life has in store. It's wasted energy trying to be God when you were made to be human. Invisible control is also the one you exert over your own emotions. How often do you force yourself to be positive when you're sad, productive when you're exhausted, sociable when you need solitude? You've created a system of internal tyranny that's more rigid than any external dictatorship. And the price is clear: burnout, anxiety, the constant feeling that you're living someone else's life. Today's practice is radical in its simplicity. Identify a worry that's consuming your mental energy, something you can't directly control right now. Mentally place that worry in a paper boat and let it sail downstream. It's not about not caring. It's about not carrying what isn't yours to carry. It's about freeing up the energy you are wasting trying to control the uncontrollable to focus on what's truly in your hands. Your response to the present moment. Principle 3. The hidden rhythm of the world. Have you ever stopped to realize that you live as if you're always late for somewhere, even when you have nowhere to go? There's a chronic rush that has infected the modern soul, a sense of constant urgency that makes you speed up even when you don't need to, that makes you feel guilty for taking a break, that turns every moment of rest into wasted time. The sage was contemplating a bamboo tree in his garden when a young man approached, panting, complaining that it was growing too slowly. "If I could, I would push each shoot to make it grow faster," the young man said impatiently. The sage smiled and told the ancient story of the man who, in his eagerness to speed up the growth of his plants, pulled the shoots upward. The next day, he found his garden dead. He had killed his plants by trying to speed them up. This is the perfect metaphor for modern life. You're killing your own peace by trying to speed up processes that have their own natural time frame. You want instant results and transformations that take years, immediate success and skills that require decades of practice, deep connections and relationships that need time to mature. And when things don't happen as quickly as you imagined, you get frustrated, give up, or beat yourself up mentally. Neuroscience reveals something fascinating about chronic haste. When you live in a constant state of urgency, your brain produces dopamine in an unregulated manner, creating a chemical dependence on the rush itself. You become addicted to the feeling of being productive, even when that productivity is just directionless movement. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for clarity and conscious decision-making, is compromised when you live at this artificial speed. Lao Tzu taught that there is a hidden rhythm to the universe, a cosmic time that governs everything, from the growth of plants to the healing of emotional wounds. When you align with this rhythm, your life flows with less effort and more efficiency. When you fight it, you waste energy trying to push a river to flow faster. The rhythm of life is like the rhythm of your heart. If it accelerates too much, it loses harmony and can collapse. Your heart doesn't beat at the speed you'd like. It beats at the speed you need to stay alive. Likewise, your life doesn't evolve at the speed your anxiety would like. It evolves at the speed necessary for you to truly integrate each lesson, each growth, each transformation. The technique that will change your perception of time is this. Choose a simple activity you do every day, taking a shower, making coffee, walking to your car, and deliberately do it at half your usual speed. It's not about being slow. It's about being present. Feel the difference in the quality of experience when you're not rushing to get to the next moment. Notice how time, paradoxically, expands when you stop fighting it. Principle 4. Void is not the enemy. Here's a truth no one wants to admit. You're afraid of emptiness. Afraid of being alone with your thoughts. Afraid of moments without stimulation. Afraid of realizing what's really happening in your life when you remove all distractions. That's why you fill every free second with something. TV shows, social media, music, conversations, work, anything that prevents you from facing the silence of your own existence. The sage observed people in lines, at traffic lights, in waiting rooms, all with their faces illuminated by the blue light of their cell phones, as if addicted to a luminous drug that promised to save them from the terror of being alone with themselves for a few minutes. They didn't realize they were fleeing the void like someone fleeing an illness, unaware that this void was, in fact, a sacred space waiting to be inhabited. Lao Tzu whispered through the millennia, "The Tao is like the valley, always available to be filled." Emptiness is not lack. It is unmanifested potential. It is the space where miracles can happen, where insights can emerge, where you can finally hear the voice of your own wisdom without the interference of constant mental noise. Modern psychology confirms something striking. Most addictions, not just chemical ones, but behavioral ones such as social media, compulsive shopping, overwork, and toxic relationships are ways of escaping existential emptiness. They are desperate attempts to fill a space that should never be filled, because that's where their true nature resides. When you stop running from the void and learn to inhabit it, something extraordinary happens. You discover you were never empty. What you called emptiness was simply the silence of your essence, pure and uncontaminated by the demands of the outside world. It was your soul breathing unhurriedly, your consciousness existing without needing to prove anything to anyone. Emptiness is where you remember who you were before you learned to fear yourself. It's where you find answers to questions you didn't even know you were asking. It's where you stop being held hostage by other people's opinions because you finally remember what truly matters to you, away from the noise of social expectations. Here's the practice that will revolutionize your relationship with emptiness. Set aside 5 minutes, just 5, to sit in silence, doing absolutely nothing. No meditating, no praying, no problem solving, no goals. Just sit and allow emptiness to be emptiness. When anxiety creeps in, when the mental voice starts listing everything you should be doing, thank it for visiting and keep sitting. You're training yourself to recognize that emptiness won't kill you. It will reveal who you really are behind all the masks you wear to survive in the world. Principle 5. Flexibility that overcomes strength. There's an emotional rigidity you carry around like armor, but it's actually become your prison. It's the need to always be right, to never appear weak, to maintain control in every situation, to never admit you don't know something. You pride yourself on your strength, but that strength has become rigidity, and rigidity, in life, always breaks. The sage contemplated 2 trees during a storm, a centuries-old oak, rigid and proud, and a young bamboo, flexible and humble. The wind came with full force, and what happened was a lesson that would echo forever. The oak, trying to resist with all its strength, broke in half. The bamboo, bending gracefully before the storm, remained intact. When the storm passed, the bamboo returned to its natural position, while the oak lay shattered. This is a metaphor for modern life. You were taught to be an oak when you should have learned to be bamboo. You were conditioned to view flexibility as weakness, when in fact it's the most sophisticated survival strategy there is. When you become rigid in your opinions, expectations, and ways of reacting, any unexpected change in life has the power to break you. Emotional rigidity manifests itself in subtle ways. That irritation when things don't go as planned, that anxiety when you have to admit you've made a mistake, that anger when someone criticizes you constructively, that resistance when life invites you to grow beyond your comfort zone. You've become so identified with your positions that any questioning feels like a personal attack. Alan Watts, echoing Taoist wisdom, offered a revolutionary perspective. Life is better understood as dance than as war. When you're dancing, you don't fight the music, you move with it. When you're at war, every movement of the other is a threat to be countered. The difference lies in your inner posture. Are you here to fight or to dance? True strength isn't found in rigidity. It's found in the ability to adapt without losing one's essence. It's like water, which takes the shape of its container without ceasing to be water. It's like the wind, which bypasses obstacles without ceasing to be wind. It's the ability to be vulnerable without becoming a victim, to be strong without becoming inflexible. Vulnerability, despite everything you've learned, isn't weakness. It's a spiritual survival strategy. When you admit you don't know everything, you open up space to learn. When you acknowledge mistakes, you create opportunities to grow. When you allow your wounds to be seen, you allow them to heal. Vulnerability is the courage to be imperfect in a world that sells the illusion of perfection. Here's your transformative practice. The next time someone criticizes you or you make a visible mistake, respond with gentleness rather than defensiveness. Instead of immediately justifying yourself or counterattacking, stop, breathe, and ask yourself, what can I learn from this? It's not about becoming a doormat. It's about choosing to respond from a position of flexible strength rather than breakable rigidity. You'll find that when you stop fighting criticism, it loses its power to hurt you and gains the power to strengthen you. Principle 6. The body is the first temple. There's a spiritual heresy you need to abandon. The idea that to evolve spiritually you must ignore or transcend your body. How many times have you pushed your body beyond its limits in the name of spiritual productivity? How many times have you meditated when you were exhausted, fasted when you needed nourishment, or kept commitments when your body screamed for rest? The sage encountered a woman who had spent years seeking enlightenment through rigorous practices, prolonged fasting, and extreme disciplines. She was pale, weak, with dark circles under her eyes, but her eyes shone with what she believed to be spiritual fervor. "I am transcending physical limitations to reach higher states of consciousness," she declared, proud of her dedication. The sage observed her for a moment and asked, "How do you intend to inhabit heaven if you are destroying the ladder that leads to it?" This is the fatal contradiction of modern spirituality. You treat your body as an obstacle to spiritual growth, when in fact it is the vehicle through which all spiritual experience manifests. Your body is not a prison for the soul. It is the temple where your consciousness dwells in this dimension. And when you mistreat the temple, the divinity within cannot fully express itself. Spiritual neuroscience reveals something Taoists have intuited for millennia. When your body is chronically fatigued, malnourished, or constantly stressed, your ability to access higher states of consciousness is severely compromised. A failing nervous system cannot sustain the mental clarity necessary for deep insights, genuine compassion, or authentic presence. You can't meditate your way out of burnout if you continue to ignore your body's basic needs. Lao Tzu taught with the simplicity of one who understands nature. Caring for your body is like caring for a garden. Neither too much water nor too little. Neither too much sun nor too much shade. There is an organic wisdom in your body that predates and surpasses any mental philosophy. It knows when it needs to rest, when it needs to move, when it needs silence, when it needs to connect. But you've learned to distrust this wisdom in favor of schedules, goals, and external expectations. The body is your first guru, your first temple, your first sacred book. It teaches you about natural rhythms, the art of alternating movement and rest, tension and relaxation, fasting and nutrition. When you learn to listen to your body's whispers before they become screams of pain or illness, you develop a somatic intelligence that no book can teach. Fatigue isn't laziness. It's bodily wisdom signaling that you're expending energy you don't have. Hunger isn't weakness. It's metabolic intelligence asking for fuel to keep functioning. Muscle tension isn't just stress. It's unprocessed emotion stored in the tissues, waiting to be released through conscious movement. Here's the practice that will reconnect you with the wisdom of your first temple. Before each meal, take 5 deep, slow breaths. This isn't a relaxation technique. It's a ritual of communicating with your body, signaling to the nervous system that it's safe to digest, safe to nourish, and safe to slow down for a few minutes. Notice how this simple practice changes not only how you digest food, but how you digest life. With more presence, less rushing, more gratitude for the miracle of being alive in a functioning body. Principle 7. The invisible path back to simple. You've complicated your life so subtly that you don't even realize the weight you're carrying. Not just the physical weight of the unnecessary objects you accumulate, but the mental weight of the unnecessary decisions you have to make, the unnecessary options you have to consider, the unnecessary worries you cultivate as if they were rare plants. The sage watched a man walking up the mountain carrying a huge backpack, stumbling with every step, sweating profusely, and complaining about the difficult path. When he finally stopped to rest, the sage approached and asked, "What are you carrying?" The man proudly opened the backpack. Important stones he had collected over the years, essential tools for situations that might never arise, necessary provisions for famines that existed only in his imagination. "How long has it been since you walked without that backpack?" the sage asked. The man was silent for a long time, and then he whispered, "I don't even remember what it was like to walk lightly. I guess I'm afraid that if I take off my backpack, I'll find I don't need any of the things I've spent years accumulating." It was the perfect confession of the modern human condition. You become addicted to your own complexity because simplicity feels like loss. The disturbing truth is that your hyper-complex life isn't a result of external circumstances. It's the result of the unconscious choices you've made over the years. Every unnecessary yes, every commitment that doesn't align with your values, every object you buy to fill an emotional void, every relationship you maintain out of guilt rather than love, all of it accumulates like stones in your backpack until you forget what it was like to walk without unnecessary weight. Lao Tzu teaches that simplicity is not renunciation, it is refinement. It is the art of removing all that is non-essential to reveal the beauty that already existed beneath the excess. Like a sculptor who adds nothing to the marble, he only removes what does not belong to the statue that has always been there, waiting to be revealed. Complexity is seductive because it creates the illusion of importance. The busier you are, the more important you feel. The more things you own, the more secure you feel. The more options you consider, the smarter you think you are. But this complexity is often a sophisticated form of existential procrastination, a way of avoiding facing the simple, fundamental questions. What truly matters to you? How do you want to spend your remaining days? Who are you when you remove all social masks? Simplicity is not simplistic. It's not about living like a monk or abandoning all your responsibilities. It's about conscious discernment. It's about consciously choosing what to add to your life rather than unconsciously accumulating. It's about learning to say no to what's good in order to say yes to what's essential. Every unnecessary thing you remove from your life, whether it's a commitment that drains your energy, an object you haven't used in years, a thought that no longer serves you, a relationship that exists only out of habit, returns energy that was wasted on maintenance to be invested in creation. It returns attention that was fragmented in 1,000 directions to be focused on what truly deserves your presence. Here's the practice that will begin your journey back to simplicity. Choose just one area of your life today. It could be your desk, your weekly schedule, or even your morning thoughts, and consciously remove 3 things that are there but don't need to be. This isn't a cleansing. It's an act of reverence for the sacred space that is your existence. Notice how removing the superfluous doesn't create emptiness, but reveals fullness that was already there, hidden beneath layers of unnecessary clutter. As the sage shared these principles, 3 figures approached the circle where he was teaching, each representing a different response to the wisdom being revealed. They were not just casual listeners. They were living mirrors of the resistances and possibilities that reside within every person who encounters life-changing truths. The first was a man in an impeccable suit, with perfectly groomed hair, holding a cell phone as if it were an extension of his arm. He listened with growing irritation, shaking his head at each principle presented. "This is romanticizing laziness," he interrupted, his voice thick with disdain. In the real world, those who stop to observe their breath or embrace emptiness are left behind. This Wu-Wei philosophy is a luxury for those without responsibilities. He represented the voice that lives in the heads of millions. The voice of fear disguised as pragmatism, of insecurity masquerading as productivity, of existential emptiness hidden behind material achievements. It was the sound of resistance that arises every time you consider the possibility of living differently, more lightly, more consciously. His presence was necessary because, without acknowledging this inner voice, any transformation remains superficial. "You're afraid," the sage replied with disarming kindness. "Afraid of discovering you spent years running on a treadmill, believing that frantic movement was progress. Afraid of discovering that there's a way to be productive without being violent to yourself. Your resistance doesn't protect you from failure. It ensures you never experience true fulfillment." The second figure was an elderly woman, her movements soft and her eyes filled with decades of consciously lived experience. She had weathered her own storms and learned to dance with them. "Every principle you share," she told the sage, "took me years to discover and practice. Silence was my greatest teacher after I lost my husband and had to learn to inhabit solitude without losing myself in it. The letting go of control came when my children grew up, and I had to accept that they would make choices I never would." She was living proof that these were not abstract theories, but tools forged in the fire of real human experience. Her presence brought weight and credibility to the teachings, showing that there is a possible path through hardship, that others have walked these dark paths and emerged wiser, not more bitter. The difference between suffering and transformation, she continued, is awareness. The same experiences that break one person can strengthen another. It's not about avoiding pain. It's about learning to dance with it in a way that it becomes your teacher rather than your tormentor. The third was a young adult, perhaps in his 30s, with eyes that alternated between skepticism and hope. He neither rejected the teachings like the antagonist, nor fully embraced them like someone who had already walked the path. He represented the mindset of most people, intrigued by the possibilities, but haunted by practical doubts. "I understand the theory," he said, his voice thick with honest vulnerability. "But what about when you have 2 small children, a mortgage, a boss who calls on the weekend, and a mother-in-law who criticizes every decision you make? How do you practice Wu Wei when real life constantly forces you to act? How do you embrace emptiness when every free minute you have is interrupted by a pressing responsibility?" His questions echoed the doubts that arise in every practical mind. Does this work in the real world? How do we reconcile ancient wisdom with modern demands? Is it possible to be spiritually evolved and still pay the bills? The sage smiled, recognizing the sincerity of the question. Do you think the ancient masters didn't have responsibilities? Lao Tzu served as a royal librarian, dealing with politics, bureaucracy, and social pressures. The difference isn't the absence of challenges. It's the quality of presence you bring to each challenge. Wu Wei doesn't mean not acting. It means acting without carrying unnecessary emotional weight. You still change the baby's diaper, but you don't carry resentment about having to do it. You still work, but you don't turn every project into a matter of life or death. It was fascinating to observe how these 3 perspectives intertwined, creating a dialogue that mirrored the internal conversations each person has when faced with the possibility of change. The antagonist forced the sage to ground the teachings in practical reality. The mentor offered proof that it was possible. The ambiguous one asked the questions everyone wanted to ask, but was too embarrassed to voice. Slowly, something began to happen. The antagonist, while resisting, began asking more nuanced questions, as if his curiosity were overcoming his defensiveness. The ambiguous one began to see practical paths where before he had seen only obstacles. And the mentor began to share specific stories of how he had applied each principle in moments of real crisis. Transformation, the sage observed, rarely happens through dramatic conversion. It happens through honest questioning, courageous experimentation, and compassionate patience with yourself. Each of you is at a different point on the journey, but you are all moving in the same direction. Back to remembering who you truly are when you peel away the layers of social conditioning and existential fear. And it was in that moment of utter vulnerability that the miracle happened. Not the kind you see in movies, but the kind that happens when a soul stops fighting its own nature. The young man, still with tears in his eyes, began to breathe differently, slower, deeper, as if he were remembering something he had long forgotten. "I can feel it," he whispered, almost in disbelief. "I can feel the silence behind the mental noise. It's not empty. It's like a space where I can finally rest." It was as if, by no longer running from a void, he had discovered that he had never been empty. What he called emptiness was simply the absence of the constant mental noise, and in that absence, his true nature could finally breathe. The sage observed the transformation with the stillness of one who has witnessed this miracle many times, yet he never ceases to be struck by its simplicity. "You see," he said softly, "you didn't need to add anything to your life to find peace. You just needed to stop resisting what was already there." Something unexpected happened then. The man in the suit, who had spent the entire time resisting and criticizing, slowly put away his cell phone. For the first time since he'd arrived, his shoulders relaxed. "I recognize what he's feeling," he admitted, his voice lower now, less defensive. "For 15 years, I've woken up every morning with a sense of panic in my chest. I thought it was ambition, that it was drive. But maybe Maybe it's just fear of stopping long enough to realize I'm running in circles. It was the breaking of the second layer of resistance. The antagonist wasn't really an antagonist. He was a person terrified by the possibility that everything he had fought for was a sophisticated way of escaping himself. His resistance to the teachings wasn't arrogance. It was the self-preservation of someone who knew, subconsciously, that if he allowed himself to question one aspect of his life, he would have to question all aspects. The difference between healthy ambition and compulsive avoidance, the sage explained, lies in the quality of energy you bring to your actions. When you act from a place of inner fulfillment, even the most challenging projects become forms of creative expression. When you act from a place of inner emptiness, even the greatest achievements feel like obligatory tasks you fulfill to prove something to yourself or others. The elderly woman, who had watched the entire transformation in reverent silence, finally spoke. What you are discovering now, I have learned decades through unnecessary pain. That peace is not the absence of challenges. It is the presence of serenity in the midst of challenges. That happiness is not having everything solved. It is knowing how to dance with the unsolvable. It was as if the three characters, the vulnerable young man, the resilient executive, and the wise mentor, represented the three stages of the human journey: necessary rupture, understandable resistance, and mature integration. They were simultaneously real people and aspects of the psyche of anyone faced with the possibility of living more consciously. Something extraordinary began to happen. The three, who had arrived as strangers with conflicting perspectives, began to form a natural circle around the sage. It wasn't just physical proximity. It was as if their individual resistances were dissolving into a shared understanding. The executive took the young man's hand in a spontaneous gesture of compassion. The mentor placed a hand on each of their shoulders. The sage watched with quiet satisfaction, knowing he had witnessed something that cannot be forced, only facilitated. The moment when isolated people remember they are part of something greater. The 7 principles are not individual techniques, the sage revealed. They are aspects of a single truth. You are not separate from the life you are living. You are not a victim of chaos. You are a conscious expression of the same universe that created the stars, the oceans, and the silence between the sounds. When you stop fighting what is, you discover that you have always been part of what is. Remember the question that opened this entire meeting? How do you become a mountain when you've been conditioned to be a whirlwind? The answer had emerged through their own experience, not through theoretical explanations. You don't become a mountain by fighting the gale, the sage concluded. You become a mountain by remembering that you were always a mountain, even when you were so identified with the winds that passed over you that you forgot your own solidity. The gale is temporary. The mountain is eternal. And you are both the watcher of the winds and the stability that remains unchanged, no matter how strong the storm. It was the moment when everything connected. All the principles, all the practices, all the metaphors revealed themselves as different aspects of a single awakening. The remembrance that you were never lost, only distracted. You were never broken, only fragmented by the belief that you were separate from the whole that had always sustained you. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was pregnant with possibility. It was the silence of souls who remembered how to breathe without fear, how to exist without needing to prove anything, how to love without needing to control the outcome of that love. The sun was setting as the sage prepared to leave the small group that had gathered around him. But before he left, he proposed something. Let's go back to the market where it all began. I want you to see something. They walked together to the same place where, hours ago, the noise had seemed unbearable, where the 1,000 voices shouted their urgencies, where chaos seemed to reign supreme. But something had changed. Not the market, but the quality of the presence they brought to the market. The young man, who had arrived anxious and fragmented, now walked with slower, more conscious steps. He still heard the noise, but he was no longer fighting it. It's like I'm a radio that finally found the right frequency, he said, smiling. The noise is still there, but it's no longer interfering with the music. The executive, who had spent the entire initial meeting compulsively checking his phone, now kept it in his pocket. I always thought stopping meant falling behind, he reflected, but now I realize I was running so fast I never got anywhere. It was directionless movement, hurry without purpose. The mentor smiled with the satisfaction of recognizing wisdom emerging from previously closed minds. It took me 60 years to learn that life isn't something that happens to you. It's something that happens through you. And when you stop resisting the flow, you become part of it. The sage stopped in the exact center of the market, in the same place where he had begun his journey. He closed his eyes again, and this time the others did the same. The noise was still there, vendors shouting, cars passing, people talking urgently. But now it sounded different. Not like an invasion, but like a symphony. Not like chaos, but like the cosmic dance they had always been a part of. Do you hear the difference? The sage asked softly. It's not the world that's changed. It's the quality of your listening that's transformed. When you stop resisting what is reveals itself as music. It was true. What had once seemed like a cacophony now sounded like life. Life in all its complexity, contradiction, and imperfect beauty. They were no longer trying to silence the world. They were learning to be vast enough to hold it without being disturbed by it. Lao Tzu whispered through the millennia. The sage continued, that it is not the world that needs to be silent. It is you who need to become spacious enough to contain all sounds without being disturbed by any of them. It is not the chaos that needs to stop. It is you who need to learn that you have never been separate from the dance. But how do we maintain this? The young man asked, the vulnerability still present in his voice. How do we carry this peace home, to work, to the real problems that will be waiting tomorrow morning? It was the question every awakened person asks. How do you integrate insight into practical life? The sage smiled with the patience of someone who has answered this question 1,000 times in 1,000 different ways. Applying one principle at a time, one day at a time. Not to escape life, but to inhabit it lightly. Today, practice the silence that cannot be heard. Tomorrow, try letting go of one small thing. Next week, observe your natural rhythm instead of forcing the rhythm you think you should have. Real transformation, he continued, doesn't happen through dramatic revolutions. It happens through consistent microevolutions. One conscious breath at a time, one aligned choice at a time, one moment of presence at a time. The executive, who had arrived skeptical and defensive, now asked a question that surprised everyone. What if we fail? What if we revert to old patterns? You will fail, the sage replied with refreshing honesty. Many times, you will forget to breathe consciously. You will try to control what cannot be controlled. You will resist emptiness, speed up when you should slow down, complicate when you could simplify. And do you know what that means? Everyone waited in silence. It means you're human. And being human is about practicing, failing, remembering, and practicing again. Perfection isn't the goal. Awareness is. Every time you realize you've lost your way, you've already come back. Every time you recognize you're resisting, you've already started flowing again. Don't try to change everything at once. The sage advised as the group prepared to disperse. Choose one practice, just one, and honor it for a week. When it becomes second nature, add another. Build your transformation like building a mountain, one stone at a time, with patience and reverence for the process. He looked at each of them with a gentle intensity that seemed to see through social masks to their very essence. You don't need to become different people. You just need to remember who you've always been beneath all the conditioning, fear, and rush. You just need to come home, not to the place where you live, but to the place where you've always belonged, the present moment, inhabited with awareness and acceptance. When they finally parted, each brought something different from what they had brought before. The young man brought hope where there had been despair. The executive brought healthy questions where there had been rigid certainties. The mentor brought renewed purpose where before there had been only memories of past wisdom. And the sage? He carried the quiet satisfaction of having planted seeds that would germinate in moments he would never witness, in transformations that would unfold long after he was gone. His last words echoed in their minds as they went their separate ways. Remember, when you stop fighting the storm, it becomes the wind that pushes your boat home. When you stop resisting the chaos, it reveals itself as the dance you've always been a part of. When you stop running from yourself, you discover you were never lost, just distracted from your own magnificence. And so, the marketplace of 1,000 voices continued its eternal din. But 4 people walked away from it transformed, carrying in their hearts the memory of a simple, revolutionary truth. Chaos is not your enemy. It is your teacher. And when you stop fighting it, it becomes your ally on the journey home, to the peace that has always resided at the core of who you truly are. This wasn't a conclusion. It was a beginning. The beginning of living each day as if it were an opportunity to practice these principles, to remember these truths, to choose awareness over automatism. The beginning of a life lived not as resistance to what is, but as a dance with what is. And you, who have listened to this story to the end, now carry these seeds as well. The question isn't whether they will germinate. It's when you will begin to water them with your attention, your commitment, and your courage to live differently in a world that often rewards unconsciousness. The market of 1,000 voices will continue to scream, but now you know the secret. You can choose whether to be just one more voice in the chaos, or to be the silence in which all voices can exist without disturbing you. Which one do you choose to be?